Hi there, you're listening to the Bigfoot Society podcast, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. Every week I talk to individuals who have experienced Sasquatch in some way or another, so you won't want to miss an episode. Make sure you're subscribed on the platform that you're listening to, and share this episode with a friend. It does not cost a thing, and it helps the show continue to grow. If you'd like to hear Bigfoot Society episodes early and ad-free, you can do so by becoming a Patreon supporter or a YouTube channel member. Links to those are in the show notes. In Bigfoot Society, I've taken far too much of your time so far, so let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Teia tonight. And she contacted me from the great state of Oregon about some things that they've experienced over a 9-year period. How's it going tonight, Teia?
It's going very good. Perfect weather.
Definitely perfect weather. It's starting to get a little bit cooler out here in Iowa, and I'm sure it's beautiful out there in Oregon as well. But, you sent me a little bit about what happened. It sounds like a fascinating story. And you even were able to talk with, Cliff Barrickman about it. And I can't wait to hear the whole story. So I'm just so glad that you're on the phone with me tonight.
Well, thank you very much for having me, for inviting me. I really appreciate that. And it's very good to be able to bring it to the forefront. I listened to your podcast about being close in to neighborhoods and such. And though we were out and we did have neighbors, we weren't right in a town or having a bop around like that. But we were around neighbors. There were far off distant farms and such. And when we went there because we had decided we wanted to do something different. People, they go to Yellowstone Park and they're camp hosts at Yellowstone, all the different ways in, and we thought, gee, that might be a good adventure since we had a decent RV we could be in. And we just fell into this kind of a watch situation where we were watching equipment for logging and various different things going on in this property, which also included that they would have occasional hikers come through there and so forth. So they wanted everything watched, and it was a really good deal for us because we weren't really. We didn't feel like we were really working. We were all able to keep jobs outside of there, but we were able to be up there in the times and the necessary times and overnight when they really needed us to keep an eye on things. So it felt pretty good. And, it was like, parents, we were never actually, I do need to digress a little bit. We never did ever reveal that we ever had those experiences there because of the various different people that would come in. And we did not want anybody to be fearful of anything because, number one, it's a forest and it has everything in it, from bobcat, bear, coyote. The bear was a small bear. It was a tiny bear, but we had owls and everything in there that you would expect. So we tried to help folks that did come in there to understand that it was actually a forest. It needed to be regarded as such so that there wouldn't be any surprises from any of the wild animals. And we tried to we were there, they'd ask questions, but we'd, always be distracted from our job with geocache and Pokemon folks, and they'd drop by, do you got a clue? We know what's up here, and all that. And of course, we didn't, because we didn't do that. But our adventure started in September of 09. We moved into the little RV site thing that they had set up for us. And, after living in a park for a while, a regular RV park, I just felt totally wonderful there, because it was just a breath of fresh air, and having a variety of evergreens and a blend of deciduous. It was a glorious forest, a great place to be, peace and quiet, no cars. So, here we are. We move in. We're just left on our own to explore and to find our way through the forest on our own. They just were so happy to have us. They just go, okay, here it is, have fun, basically. And so we started to explore, and, we didn't make our way through the forest right away. We went out and we watched the bluff. It was beautiful. It's a southwest view. It was just totally glorious with the sunset colors and everything. So we listened to all the woodland sounds and watched, the sun sink into the west and sizzle its way out. But it wasn't dark. It was still light. So I said to my husband, hey, we're here. So why don't we go exploring? And he's like, well, it's almost dark. He wasn't so sure about that. We had a side-by-side that was left there for us to use. And I'd never driven a side-by-side. I'd driven farm things and a four-wheeler and things like that. Had to be adventurous. So we decided to take our first trip to the forest, not realizing that it was dusk up there, or not quite dusk. But when you get into the forest, it's like a lot darker. And so we're going snaking down this kind of, logging road thing down this hill, and it's getting dark. And we had the lights on, but I thought, well, geez, these aren't bright enough. So I reached down and went to put the brights on while my husband was driving, and the lights went out. So that was our first little adventure in the forest. Thank God I had my mag light flashlight, and I got it on the big spot, the spotlight part, and I put it at the ditch, and I said, okay, honey, follow the bouncing ball. And I bounced it up through the ditch line, and we got back up around the corner and up there where it was safe and in our house. But, that was our first tour of of the forest in the dark. Our next tour was daylight. And, we went down the road and explored all the different parts of the area, and looking over everything that we needed to look over. And it was just, a wonderful, beautiful place to be. After a rain, it smelled like Christmas trees. It was so clean and beautiful in there. And on the weekends, we'd go out and just sit and have our coffee on this deck that we kind of threw together really quick right after we moved there, and we fenced it in to be kind of a catio, and we would cook out there every night. And within a few days, we experienced odd noises, whistles, and a lot of coyote calls, and all different from all different directions around the hill, and it was most nights. And fall was coming fast, and as the coyotes seemed to quit calling and being around, the owls came out, and it became more frequent, giving kind of a haunted feeling to the forest. But I guess it seemed to be mating season that was upon us, and but it just seemed like it was getting busier and busier with the animals outside. We would just sit out there and cook outdoors. Below us, we had it was an undeveloped part of the forest. It was really pretty rugged down there. It hadn't really had any road built into it. Anything done down there had to be pretty much done on foot or with some type of heavy equipment. And it was pretty heavily forested down there. And we just, sit there and be cooking our meal, and all of a sudden we got this just god awful odor, and it was my thought to be a dead deer, because cougars going through there, they're probably a cougar kill. But my husband's very sensitive to odor, and he complained that the smell was like and still today, he says it was the most unclean human rotting flesh smell that he ever smelled. And but for me, since it was a forest, it had all the animals and birds, and a person would expect that perhaps there would be a predator in there and leave bones behind. But unfortunately, that odor made it a little unsettling, because, our first days there, we seemed to notice that there were very few deer living there. So we didn't know, we had no idea what was going on that way. But a few days after moving in, and while on our daylight side-by-side ride through miles of roads and trails, we came upon a rack of fresh killed deer bones in the road, and it looked like it had been boned out by a hunter, like a hunter's bounty. But one thing was wrong. It 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 just wasn't how it laid there. Wasn't right. It could have been drugged by a coyote because it found it, but it was boned out, but not, and it wasn't a complete carcass. It was boned out. The flesh had been taken off, but not by sharp teeth, and there were no knife marks in it. It seemed like the head had been just tore off of it. And of course, there weren't any front legs there, because they're only held on by soft tissue and skin anyway. So that was kind of earth shaking for us. And we were totally thinking that somebody had come in there and poached a deer and then threw the bones out up there. But with after that happened, each day led to its own strange happenings, with one strange thing after another. And much to our surprise, we found out that we had a eccentric neighbor who was sneaking in at night and building a fire in the forest and partying and in the moonlight and tossing beer cans around in the forest. And how they got in was they skinnied by a building that was there for keeping the side by in and so forth like that. And they get past that building, and they had this little truck. It was like hand spray painted camouflage, and they'd go in and swipe firewood and things like that as well, or be picking wildflowers at night with a flashlight. It was just the oddest thing. So with all that happening and a horse getting away and them coming down and checking that out and wondering if we were hiding it, bizarre little things like that. When Christmas came and we started hearing noises down over the hill into the forest in the logging area, we were just for sure thinking that this neighbor, was down there on Christmas Day. So we're dressed up, ready for Christmas dinner. We hear all this noise. I think, well, it's Christmas. We better get the side by and go out and look. So we go down there. It's 8 miles of roads and trails all around down in there to check out. And we got down there, and the noise wasn't where we heard it, but it was above us. So we go around where that was, and nobody was there. And it kept doing that and playing with us. We believed it was her, though we couldn't hear a vehicle. We believed it was this neighbor. And so we decided to, instead of going the road the way we'd been and like we were following, we started cutting across and thinking, okay, we'll run into them, we'll chase them out, it'll be done, and we could go. And we were down there an hour and a half, and we never saw one person down there. But we heard all the noise. We heard people talking. We heard laughing. We heard everything. So, all dressed up, ready to go to dinner, decided, the heck with this. We just go on up and get in the car and lock the gate on our way out. And if they were in there and they had a vehicle in there, they'd be locked in. So it was after dark when we got home, and we went with our headlights to check it out, and there wasn't anybody up there. It was just so mystifying and so weird and creepy, knowing that we were hearing things, people laughing and this and that, and there was only one way in and one way out, and we had locked that way. So that was the beginning of a lot of very weird things happening. But the weirdest thing was the nights that we heard far off howling. And I always referred to it as the Hounds of the Baskerville because it was this god awful, hair raising, screaming, weird stuff. But still, we just thought, far off neighbor dogs that got out, they're chasing around, they're barking at whatever and howling at whatever, that we never saw. And it didn't go on like every night, like a dog in a neighborhood would see something and start barking, or see nothing and bark anyway. It happened occasionally, and when it did, it was just this screamy, awful, horrible thing. And I would say to my husband, well, are we living on Murder Mountain or something? Because it was just this nervous thing about that happening out there. So we got so disturbed by all of this weirdness and this neighbor driving in and hiding out and swiping wood and stuff, that we bought a little night vision camera and didn't tell anybody. We didn't tell anybody about it. So we were blaming the neighbor for all this stuff. We thought that we shouldn't just blame her. And we figured that some of the screaming down there that we thought was kids or a woman was probably a cougar screaming or a vixen, a female fox screaming, because we weren't ever thinking, we never once ever thought Bigfoot. We just hadn't been following it. We, years ago I heard about it, but we weren't following it. We weren't watching TV. We're too busy working. And it was about that time that we did run into Finding Bigfoot people, the TV show, but we only got to kind of like look at it once in a while, and we still didn't cop a clue to this possibility of it being Bigfoot. So we kept that camera at the front of the house and would watch. And the first thing that happened was a neighbor dog come running down and put its eyeball right up against the camera because it was on a tripod about 2.5 feet off the ground. And we could see that we had a 32-inch TV with that on there. And the next thing that we saw on there was a cougar's eye. And so we knew that we had a prowler and that it was a cougar sniffing things out. That, the cougar could have been making the screaming. So we never, like I say, we never put it up to being Bigfoot at all. But there was a lot to do there with cleanup of the forest and maintaining the areas and taking care of, trash. And they had a pit toilet that they had put in there, and there was other facilities there to be used too. And we would take care of the roads and the ditches and all the touch-ups. And one night while we were sitting up at our place, we'd just gone in the house from eating out on our deck, and we heard the pit toilet door just opening and slamming shut, and opening and slamming shut, and opening and slamming shut. So husband jumped in the side-by-side and went down to check it out. There was nothing there, nothing around. He drove the whole area. Nobody, nothing was there. So that was, beginning to make us wonder about, having maybe homeless people coming in there, sneaking by the fences or whatever, and maybe they were down there doing whatever. But it just never made any sense to us at all. The noises, there were children laughing. We never found any children. In the night, we heard an eagle cry, and it's like it was flying over and doing its eagle call. There's no eagle been calling in the middle of the night that I ever heard. But, and doing all of our chores and everything, we just started watching things, and we started watching tracks in the snow when the first snow came. And sure enough, we were down near that pit toilet area, and we found bipedal tracks, or what looked bipedal, in the snow. So we go, maybe there's something going on here. Suppose we have a Bigfoot. But then I got the photos off of my phone and blew them up on the computer, and you could easily see it was a bear track, because one foot went into the other foot, making it look like a large footprint, one large footprint. So we just kind of warned the loggers and the crew to kind of keep things, food and things like that, any packaging, be sure to throw it away and not drawn in. It was a small bear. It was a very, very small little female bear. and she just kind of cruised through, and it seemed that she just cruised on, and we never saw any more of her tracks. We saw her one time, and we never saw her again. And when spring rolled around, it seemed to bring interlopers. We caught, walking out and, out of the place early in the morning hours, like 4:30 in the morning. It was getting, warm spring. And we started finding these huts, and they just looked like that those folks had made some kind of a survival type of a place to sleep in, and shoved a bunch of leaves in it. And they kind of, why we call them like survival huts is because they kind of looked like a fish's backbone with the ribs touching the ground, and it was not like rib bones. And there would be one large, thicker branch that would be up against the tree trunk, and the tip of it would be held together on the ground. It would be kind of sticking kind of in the ground a little bit and held down. And then the smaller tree branches were propped up against it all along the way on each side. So it just kind of looked like a fishbone type thing, and they had stuffed a lot of leaves in it, stuffed it full of dried leaves, and you could tell that someone had been laying in it. So we just assumed that some of these folks were sneaking in and coming up there, and we were, finding those. Well, we took them all down because they were just kind of getting in the way of different things that were being done on the property, and we no longer got them down and gone, and we started finding them again, and they were kind of scattered all throughout the forest. And one was very odd. It actually had a black plastic bag stuck up in it, and it didn't look, I can't say that it really looked human made. And others were full of like new fern boughs and new spring shoots and things like that, and they'd been smashed down. Then it wasn't long after that, the spring kept us really busy, and we could hear sounds of children playing and people talking and owls calling and sounds of eagles and everything. And there was no one in there. They couldn't be in there because they would have had to get past us. So I would say out of a 4-day span of the week, we were smelling dead deer and dirty, stinky body odor and wet moss kind of smell and this and that. And we just kind of blow it off. It sounds weird for us to blow it off, but it was, people were the concern. For us, people were the concern, not dead deer. And that's what we still thought it was, because we hadn't convinced ourselves that we could be having any other kind of visitor except humans that would come in and be messing around, curious. We were down on the side by one day in the sun, and we went tootling by, and a man was laying on a rock in the sun, put his arm in the air and waved at us, and just acted like he belonged there. So we went up and had a visit with him, and he really didn't have too much to say, and we suggested that he should probably be away from the forest before dark came. And he was gone, and we never thought anything more about him until we found a homeless camp down through past some of the logged property. And by then, it seemed as though he had vacated it, so we just never thought about that again. We continued doing our thing, cooking outside, smelling the smells. And it was a Saturday when my husband went, he just headed out to check the undeveloped part of the forest below our RV. And he was gone for hours. And I had become kind of nervous. It was totally uneven ground, overgrown, very isolated. And I would not have been able to hear him calling out to me, or even for him to get me on the telephone. But soon he came back and come bursting through the door, just breathless and excited and kind of freaking out all at one time. And he had a photo. He had photos of a footprint in the mud from a pond. And it was a pond we had no idea was there. We had never explored that. That wasn't part of what anybody said that we were assigned to do. So we just didn't. We just kept our nose to the grindstone and did what we were told to do. So he had this footprint in the mud, but he was so excited that he didn't think to put anything beside it for measurement. And we kept that footprint. We looked at that footprint for the longest time and didn't know quite what to do with it. But the rest of the story is that he found a trail that went to a pond. We didn't know that pond was there. And how he saw it was all of these saplings were broke down, just like someone had gone through, like a tornado, making this swath through these young saplings, and they were all broke like 6 foot off and different like heights like that, but all way up high. And he couldn't figure out what the foresters had done to get it that way. But of course, until he saw the footprint, he assumed that the foresters did it. And nobody ever said anything about it. We never talked to anybody about it. But on his way back, he said that he saw this cave-style opening in some scrub brush and decided to explore it a little bit. And he said inside of there was like a teepee structure. He said it was big enough that it would have taken men to build it. He said there was no way any kids or any young people like we had seen going in there could have ever built it. And he said the opening of the structure and the ground under it was showed it been frequently used. So, just behind our house was a partially maintained game trail. And although we didn't recommend people use it, we know that we heard occasional human sounding feet going by it, like footsteps going by it, but we could never find anything. So we just assumed that maybe it was, a deer or something like that going through. But, we didn't know what to do with all this exciting information that he found. And then we started watching finding Bigfoot, and we saw Cliff on there. We saw all of them, of course, but Cliff was the one that appealed to us. So we decided that perhaps we should try to get a hold of him. So we called what we saw on at the tail end of the show and how they run all of the people that have been in it, where they've been, and so forth. We saw that there was a place that you could get a hold of finding Bigfoot producers or something like that. So we called, and they were like, yeah, we want to hear from you and everything. And we talked to them, but we finally realized that we weren't really talking to finding Bigfoot people. We were talking to somebody else that had a radio station, a radio broadcast. And actually, it didn't really help us find out anything except hearing other people talk about it, the subject. And I think it made us more nervous about everything. We had, you know, times when it was perfectly normal, and then other times it sounded like a bull crashing through the woods. We had trees being pushed over when there was no wind. They were falling. Whether they were pushed or not, I can't say. I shouldn't say pushed, but they were crashing around us. And we would find trees across the road. We would find saplings across the road. We would have to move them and so forth to clean up behind whatever was going on. And I would, I loved photography. I would go down and around into the forest and take my dog with me. I never knew who might be down there. It just pays not to go alone. So I'd get the side by out. We'd go down there and I'd shoot a lot of pictures. There was just tons of things to see and take pictures of. But yet my dog would get so nervous, and she would start this low growl and be looking behind us, and nothing was ever there. She would get so nervous some days that she'd start pulling my coat because she wanted to leave. So I just give in and get out of there and take her back. But one afternoon, I went down into this really nice, beautiful place where there were lady slippers and different, really kind of exotic. It was a very magical place. There was a creek went by it that kind of had a deep gorge. There was a nice sound. It was just a beautiful place until it wasn't. That day, it just wasn't pretty anymore. And all of the hair on the back of my neck, everywhere on me, just stood up. The smell was there. And the feel that I got, the deep feeling that I got inside of me was just, it was just so paralyzing in such a weird way that I could hardly get the side by in reverse and get it turned around to get out of there and back onto the main road. And after that day, I could never go past a certain point in that forest because it seemed like there was some type of mental thing that was stopping me. And my husband could go through there fine, but it seemed like I was stopped from going through there. And I always think back on it being because of my camera, because during this time of the bear being in there, the the owner of the whole property decided to put a game camera in there. And I just wondered in my own heart of hearts, what were Bigfoot, let's say that's what it was, this is Bigfoot, saw the infrared in my camera and just linked it to the infrared eye on the game camera. That's the only thing I can think of for me to have done a misjustice, to be like stopped, like a wall was right there and I couldn't go past it, but I didn't dare go past it. And I felt the fright of it all. And it seems so weird to have to say this when I've never been afraid in the forest ever. I lived in the forest my whole entire life in the wilderness, and I was never afraid. But this I was afraid of. So, given that, I just respected it and went on about my business without going through that part of the forest. And it was that shortly after that, that we were in bed and we had this god awful screaming and howling in the undeveloped part of the forest right below our house. And this yell scream was so incredible that you could feel the reverberation off of it, like hitting like on the windows is what it's hard, so hard to explain, because it's like you feel it, but it's not like hitting you, but it's like the air was kind of pushing through our open bedroom window, and it felt like it was like standing right outside of there, and it was so gigantic. We've heard a lot of, now that we're now watching about Bigfoot, we've heard several howls that sound exactly like that. And at first we're like, what the heck is that? And then it didn't happen again. It stopped and it was quiet. There wasn't anything making any noises out there. And about 2 minutes later, I heard an answer, and it was the same exact howl, and it was like sounded 3 or 4 canyons away, but it was loud enough that you could plainly hear that it was exactly the same thing, like somebody else had answered the one that had just yelled outside of our house. So after that, we kind of just did our thing. We didn't try to make big issue out of it. We didn't try to go hunting for it. We just were minding our own business. We had been, in the first days of being there, we had some apples and things that had kind of gone a little bit hinky, and we knew deer were there, so we set the apples out there and let the deer have them. And it only happened now and again. We weren't trying to habituate anybody or anything. We were just not. I mean, the chipmunks or the slugs or whoever wanted it could have it. And then we started later on, after the howling and things had happened, I started finding things on my porch. There was a shard of, it wasn't china, it was stoneware with this very faint, old-fashioned blue print on it. And there was a penny, and there were a couple of rocks and odd things, just odd things. And the only reason I think that they had their hands on that type of thing is because years ago there had been a house on that property and it had gotten all pushed in and kind of over into that undeveloped area. And honestly, we never went down there. The only thing I could assume is that those things were laying on the ground right there. And perhaps us not knowing what we were doing, we were actually trading trinket for trinket or something with Bigfoot. And I just kept telling my husband, I said, "Oh, look at this. Fairies are coming out of our garden and leaving us things on our porch," because we just weren't willing to actually accept that any of this could be Bigfoot. We're just like, okay, something really screamed really, really loud like a siren, and we're just going to keep on keeping on and not worry about it until we have to. Well, in 2017 is when we knew we had to. And actually, the scream was in 2017 too, about May, somewhere in there. And in June, middle of June, we had been away and we were coming home. It was about 11:30 at night. And it was just clear as could be, quiet. And we saw this weirdness almost to our house. It was probably 500 yards as the crow flies from our house. And all we could ever express was this watery, this just weird, blurry, watery type of movement. And we kept saying, it looked like the Predator. Did you ever see the Predator? And the only people we told at that time were our very best friends, and we were scared they wouldn't believe us. And we said, look, we saw this thing that looked like the Predator when it went through the forest. And it did until it came out in the headlights. And before it came out, actually, we saw a deer run across the road. And we saw this blurriness. And then we saw a Bigfoot come out of the field. It took one giant step in the middle of the road. It turned at its waist. It looked at us, and its eyes were giant red, like reflectors or coals, and then it took another step. It slid on the margin of the bank to the ditch line and went on up past the corner fence of our neighbors into our neighbor's field and was just gone like a deer. But in that time, there was enough seconds there that you could see that it was kind of a reddish color with like a blonde color down its back. And it had like dreadlocks, and it had like, what do they call that? Mutton chops, I think is what they call it. And then there's a few sprigs of hair on that one cheek that we could clearly see. And its hair was long, it was like dreadlocks. And then it had longish hair on its arms and everything. And it was just unbelievable how it just disappeared right after it looked at us. It was just gone. So we went back the next day after we did the skin pinch test all night, wondering what the heck if we'd really seen what we'd seen. We questioned ourselves. Sometimes we still question ourselves because it was too unbelievable what we saw. But there were actual toe marks in the mud on the edge of the ditch line where it had it dug in so deep that you could actually see the dampness in the dirt right there. And you could easily see that it was toe prints. And we went on up where we knew that it had gone to, and we weren't clear, that it totally had gone by the corner of our neighbor's fence. We didn't know that until the next day when we went back up there. And we found 2 footprints in the grass, of all things. Nobody would believe that you could see Bigfoot footprints in the grass. But honestly, it had hit there and was heavy enough that it put a deep imprint into that grass. And so you could easily see right where it stepped twice. And then there were no more footprints to be found, whether it was gone into the old tree farm that was there, or if it had just sprinted across the field. We don't know, but we got pictures of that. Unfortunately, those pictures were lost in the cell phone that we took it with, and we never did get to recover them. My husband does a lot of construction work. He knows measurements, and he said that it was easily close to 9 feet tall. His chest was very thick. We estimated probably 3-4 foot, across. And who could guess in the light of the car headlights how much it could have weighed? But it was quite stealth. I mean, it was built really strong. It looked like, for me, looking at how shiny and nice its hair was, it looked like it wasn't a juvenile, but it wasn't old. And we just can't unsee what we saw. And we want to try to share our story as best we could with the listeners, because it's an important thing to think about. If you believe that you have one in your yard, or you believe you have one on your property, it just seems best to say that they can be very stealth. We know for fact that with all of the smell through the forest, that we were constantly being monitored. Maybe there was one, maybe there were more. What were the children laughing? What was all the gibberish? Was it Chinese and Japanese people walking and hiking through there with the creek running? Who could say? But this is what we heard and experienced. And we feel that if we were paralleled through all of the trails, and if we were teased at Christmas time, like we believe now we were, anybody could be grabbed at any time if that was the idea, or could be the idea of something to be doing, especially when there's nobody else around. Just a couple nights ago, we were watching the 1 year remembrance of Carrie Arnold. We just happened to come across Hidden Existence. And there was a gentleman on there that said, you need to be aware of Bigfoot, because Bigfoot has one occupation, and that is to survive. And to survive, he has to be a killer. He's not just eating grubs and roots, that he is eating deer and other things. And that humans should be just as aware of the danger as any of the deer are. And that made a lot of sense because at any one time when we were busy with leaving the side by running, we could have never heard them sneak up on us. We never heard them when we knew they were there. We would hear the whistles when we knew they were there when we were cooking. There was one whistle that was a constant whistle. It sounded like a bird, and I would whistle back to it, thinking it was a bird. And we just would go, it would whistle, I'd whistle. And then about, I don't know, a year, 2 years after we moved away from there, I told my husband, I said, you know the funny thing about that whistle and that bird? He said, yeah. I said, did you ever notice that there were no other birds whistling that way? There was only it and me. There were no other birds that sounded that way. And we'd heard about so many whistles from people on all the different Bigfoot shows that now we know that that's probably what it was. There's so many things that we were so naive about. We never thought about Bigfoot. We never watched the shows about Bigfoot until we moved away from there. And now it's been 4 years. And we're still hearing people repeat things on the Bigfoot podcasts and videos that we've said ourselves. It's like listening to a recording of ourselves over and over and over about the trauma, about the spookiness, the noises, the fake owl calls, the fake eagle calls. It's unbelievable what can come to you this long a time later. 4 years, I think, is a long time, and we were like traumatized then, but it seems like we're still traumatized from it because now we have dreams about it that we never had before. So it's good to kind of listen to what everybody has to say, share your words and their experience with other people. Someday we'll get to the bottom of this. Someday we'll all know what it is. And, Scott Carpenter's in heaven now. He knows he's probably got his answers. Terry Arnold's in heaven now, too. They're probably the only ones with the answers right now. But we're all hoping to get there, and we're all hoping to find out in a scientific way without needing to take one of these creatures out. And I appreciate being on and invited on the show to share my words and get my story out.
Teia, thank you so much for sharing what you both experienced. It's an incredible account. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions about what you shared?
I actually would love it because
awesome.
In trying to not get too long and drawn out on everything, I have a journal, and I kind of tried to do a synopsis of the highlights and the things that I thought people would be interested in hearing about, So if you can ask me questions, it might really help to get more of the important things out.
Yeah, just a few things that I'm kind of curious about. So when you had the sighting of the Bigfoot, were you able to get a really good look at its face then?
Yeah, it had kind of a mud-colored face. In the headlights, it it was hard to tell if it was gray or if it was kind of a color similar to its hair color, because the headlights were glowing right on its face. But it seemed like it'd be, if it was daylight, it would probably be more towards the gray.
Mm.
It had very a huge head, absolutely a huge head, and the eyes were spread quite far apart. And when I say they looked like coals, they were big like that. They were big, and they glowed. They glowed this red. It's so weird how he kept saying it's the eyes, and I kept trying to say, no, it's just some reflectors down the road, and it wasn't. And I knew it wasn't, but it looked like very dark red and just kind of shined out, like it just glowed from the center out, getting like the orange color as it came out. And it had more of a, it had, in the quick look we had, I would say it wasn't ugly at all. It had more like, it had the really deep, the big brow ridge, and the eyes were going so big you could, you know, see down onto its cheeks a bit. But its mouth was just a slit. It just turned and it looked at us. It glared. It couldn't turn its head. Its neck was really thick. It couldn't turn its head. So as it was stepping, it was, thrusting like the right arm up, and it turned at the waist with its, like its left arm was kind of behind it, and it turned at the waist, looked at us for a half a second or something, long enough, and it turned back, and it took its other step, slid, and was gone up into the darkness behind the tree trunks and into the field. And it wasn't, I can't say it was necessarily pretty, but I can't say that it was like something. I mean, I was in my car, and it didn't look like an ugly monster. It just was a tall, hairy creature with red glowing eyes that looked at us and kept on going. And we think what happened is, I mean, we saw cloaking, or what now we assume is cloaking because of the words we heard, but it was like predator moving, and it kept going, what is that? What is that? And this deer came out and went across the road, and it came out behind it, and we think it made a mistake. And it just got caught in our headlights, which it wasn't expecting to do. And then it turned and looked at us and left. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that
wordy.
That definitely does. If you had to classify the creature, would you put it more into category of something that was ape-like, or maybe something more human-like, based on what you saw?
Its face. When it turned its face, like its nose and its cheekbones and stuff, looked more human, not ape. And I don't recall that it had the sagittal crest, but it was dark behind it. We had the headlights on it. The hair was, like I said, it was long, rock star like in hair in a way, and it was like dreadlocks, but the rest of the body was shiny and clean. Its arms were huge. Its thighs were huge. It's from like the foot up to the knee wasn't real long. It was the length of its height, I think, would have come from the hip to the knee. That's how it looked like it was built in the best that I can describe from, like I say, in the headlights. That side of it was like really long from the hip down to the knee, and the knee and the calves, the knee from the knee down to the feet, which I couldn't really see the feet, but the calf of the leg I remember was like real, like a rock in there or something, you know. And I suppose that's the muscle flex from the running, but uh, we just know what's, you know, kind of ingrained in our brain that it it's something, like I said, we can't unsee it. It's there. It's always going to be there. And um, a lot of the weirdness that happened was perfectly explainable once we saw it that night.
Oh, absolutely. Did you said that you saw it kind of go over to the neighbor's property? Did you ever go over and talk to the neighbors about it?
No,
Okay.
we never talked to anybody about it.
Sure.
Because we were, because we saw something that our brains weren't ready to see, I think. And it was hard enough for us. I mean, we talked about it with ourselves over and over and over and over, and trying to say, well, this was our reality. Is this what we saw? And we kept going over and over it. And the only people that we ever shared it with for these 4 years, until we went and saw Cliff, as you said in the introduction, we didn't tell anybody because we didn't trust that we wouldn't be ridiculed. And given our professions and this and that, we really didn't want to put ourselves out there that way. And our friends have been our best friends for years, so they believed us, and they're the only ones that we could ever really talk to. But we did um, get up enough courage to go over to the North American Bigfoot Museum when Cliff first got that going. It was when he was still breaking ground on the museum part, but had his gift shop open. And they weren't really busy when we popped in that day. And we said, hey, you know, we don't want to bother you. We felt shy about it. But he was there, and he's the only one we knew that had been out there researching and lived close enough to us that we could actually take our evidence to him and have him look at it. And he looked at the footprint in the mud, and he could see that the break was there, everything was there. And he said, yes, absolutely. In his educated mind, he believed that that was a Bigfoot track. And he liked it well enough to ask us if he could please have a print of it so that he could frame it to put it in his museum, and which is what we granted, because we wanted to let people know, because we lived close enough to Mount Hood and close enough to the National Forest and so forth like that, that, you know, people, you know, coming through anywhere in that part, they could see that footprint, where it came from and so forth, and have an idea that what's out there, you know. But we've been very, very secretive over our location, because there's just too many people that want to find out and go where they've been sighted. And in our case, it wouldn't have been a healthy thing for anybody to do, because, you know, you can't get in the mix with loggers and logging equipment and things like that. It just wouldn't mix. So we've never disclosed the location. Our best friends knew because they knew where we lived, but we never had company. We were just out in the woods, you know. Just our friends
Absolutely.
came over, but yeah. So I just hope with all my hopes that people, if they see them, don't try to chase them around, and just try not to get traumatized by them. I think I have to say, in the time after the fact, we left there in 2018. It was kind of, the gig was up for doing the project that we've been invited to be part of for everything we were doing. And so our gig was up, and we moved on with our fifth wheel. And in 2020, we were caught up in the wildfires up there in the area up the Clackamas River. And so I kind of believe that the two traumas together kind of have magnified a little bit to how we feel about, how we saw that the Bigfoot, and then how we now are kind of having to deal with it and the fire thing. I think the fire just kind of crashed into what we were already dealing with, But trying to be realistic about everything. We're just working through it and listening to what we can find out. And we're sharing with you. and we shared with Cliff. And we feel like what we saw is what we saw. But it doesn't matter. I'll tell you what, unless you're a courageous guy and you believe with all your heart they're not going to hurt you, if you see one, you're probably going to be doing the skin pinch test just like we are, because it's still hard to believe that we saw it,
Absolutely. And it sounds, you guys, I agree, you have been through so much with both situations, but it sounds like you are definitely starting to get a handle on what happened. And this is probably helping, being able to talk about it as well. There was another thing that you mentioned really quickly. You talked about how you heard people at certain points, or what sounded like people. And at one point you said it kind of sounded like maybe a Chinese or Japanese language. So whenever you heard people, did it kind of sound like a language type, like that type of language, or?
Yeah, actually there were a couple things that happened. I was down doing some photography, and which I totally love to do that. If I had a day off from work and wasn't on the job there, I'd go down and get photography done. And I was down there, it was quiet. Everything stopped making a noise. We had tree frogs and we had birds, everything. All of a sudden, everything went quiet, and somebody goes, "Hey." And I'm like, oh my God, where's that? I looked all around, and there was nothing there, but my dog, who was my partner, was sitting there shivering like she was in an ice bath. And it creeped me out too. So I thought, okay, well, maybe we just better wander on back up to our house. But yes, it sounded, there was a creek there. And so there were, a lot of different foreign people would come visit friends. Friends knew that place they would allow, when there weren't workers in there, that they could walk through it or hike or whatever. But if you were near the creek, anybody speaking English or otherwise could sound really garbled. And so I just assumed that that's what it was. But we heard at night, at dusk, just before it's getting dark, we could hear children playing down there. We could hear them laughing. We could go up onto this. We were up on kind of a mountain, and there was this knoll there that we could get on. We could watch the sunset, and sound carries uphill. and we could hear children down by the restrooms playing and giggling and laughing. And we'd get the side by side out and go down there to check to see what family was in there. And there was never anybody there. The same with the door to the privy. Slam, bang, slam, bang. And went down there to check. Nobody was there. Honest to goodness, nobody was there. I have kind of a sixth sense about things, and I used to feel like I was being watched, which a lot of people do, but I would feel it particularly at night. And it used to feel like one of them was just sitting out there under a tree beside the house. And I know it could be my imagination, but that was what I started feeling. And then, of course, my husband, I never brought this up in the story, but my husband, we had 3 plum trees that have been growing there because of that other home that had been there. And they were ancient because that place was ancient. And he found these plum trees, so he went out and cleaned up all around under them. And the next day he was going to go out and pick them. And this is the God's truth. When he got out there, there was not one plum left on any of those 3 trees, not one. He said what was on the ground had ants on it, but there were no good ones left in the tree at all. And it was the weirdest thing. It was just something that we still talk about, how he prepared all of that to go pick the plums, and there wasn't one left. Clear to the top of the trees, which they're not real tall, but clear to the top of the trees, And hearing footfalls going past our house, and thinking somebody's come in there and they're messing around. And then he heard noise out there and he went out the door, and I heard whatever it was take off. It was going through the woods like crazy. You could feel it hitting the ground. And he came back in the house, and I said, geez, I said, I'd never take you hunting unless I had you dog the deer for me, because you made so much noise going through that brush that, I could hear you all the way down to the road. So that wasn't me. He said that was whatever had been in the road or in the yard ahead of me going through there. So whatever that was, only God knows. We're not going to try to label it. But, everybody says Bigfoot is quiet. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Maybe he is part of the time, and maybe if he gets scared, he makes a lot of noise running away,
Sure. Yeah.
But it, it happened. It's just so, it's so mysterious, and we keep saying, why us? I mean, we had no idea. We had no clue at all. I almost feel like I've had to tell the story backwards instead of saying, geez, in 2017, we had this, predator thing, and then this Bigfoot and the deer chasing the deer and all this, and blah, blah, blah. But no, I feel like it's all backwards because how it started out and how we never one time ever thought of a Bigfoot, not once. And like I said, living in the wilderness like I did, I never thought about Bigfoot at all. I mean, people were what you looked out for. You didn't look out for the animals. Usually they were afraid of you. They minded their business. You minded yours and all that stuff, And then later, since all of this, looking back onto my experiences there, I know that there was a Bigfoot there too. And that makes me feel like I'm even crazier, knowing that some of the noises and sounds I heard there were just exactly like what I've heard other people describe and heard on the recordings that people have made, And it's just it's just weird, but it's my experience. And nothing happened to me. And I guess I'm richer for it that I had this experience, and my husband and I had this experience. And, I went through all the things that some people go through. Like some people say, well, they're from the Nephilim. Other people have other ideas, about paranormal stuff. I don't know what I want to think about it, but at one point in my feelings about it, I was just like rebuking it because I didn't know if it was evil or if it was alien like anybody says, or if it was actual creature, animal existence like Cliff and the researchers believe. There's all different thoughts on it. And I got to the point where it was kind of bugging me so much. I just said, go away. I didn't see you. I don't want to know about you. And my husband's not that way. I mean, he'll sit and watch Bigfoot stuff and all of that, but I don't think that I've ever been conceited enough to think that we're the only thing, humans and animals are the only thing that exists in this world. That, we have odd things. We're finding new animals, new creatures, and even hidden primitive peoples in different jungles of the world, where they're discovering that there's these natives that live there in their tribe, and nobody ever saw them in their whole life, So we would be remiss to think that we were had all the answers and we're the only, hot shots on this earth, I guess.
Absolutely. We need to be, able to admit that there might be something else that we quite don't know about yet. And
yeah,
that's a good place to start.
It'll be exciting to, we found hair and stuff like that, but we never put it up to anything more than we never thought Bigfoot, no way, shape, or form, nothing. But, things get, things get mistaken for hair all the time, like that black moss that hangs out of the trees. As a kid, we used to call it witch's hair, so it could have easily been that. Most of the time, I just poo-pooed things like that if my husband brought them to me, because I lived with wildlife before and understand a lot of things. That I've studied a lot, and I just go, no, that's not that. And it's not to say I'm a non-believer. It's just to say that I'm a realist. And if it doesn't look real, then I'm not going to say it is real, And that's the same as it is with Bigfoot. We don't know what Bigfoot is yet. And that's why I stayed away from most of the Facebook pages, because I hear all kinds of things that, for me, they don't fit my reality of what is, like, I don't think it's some fairy tale thing, and people can have their own opinion, and that's cool. They can believe what they want to believe and find their answers the way they want to find their answers. And we're still looking. We're still looking for an answer. We're waiting for Jeff Meldrum and some of them, Cliff. He has a special place up on Mount Hood.
Mm-hmm.
We're waiting for those guys to say, hey, guess what?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of us are, for sure. But Teia, this has been just an incredible chat of, such a long period that you were out there, and thank you for sharing it on the show. I think a lot of people are going to be able to take this information and maybe unlock some memories of their own with it. So thank you so much for coming on.
And thank you for inviting me. And I hope the listeners will be kind and understand that this has been a very traumatic thing. And I just say happy trails to everybody out there in their search, and opening their minds to what's going on. And I thank you very, very much for inviting me on. It was my pleasure to stumble through it and try to do my best. And we'll be listening to you because we really are fans.